Hi everyone, Dr. Samantha Cottrera here for the Imagining a New We video blog, a video series designed to help history teachers and other history educators teach history in ways that are more meaningful, transformative, and inclusive for their students. Because Mondays are meaningful, I have started the fall videos on Mondays with these short reflective videos, bringing in some ideas of theory and ending with kind of a reflection prompt to see if there are elements of your practice that you might want to reflect upon throughout the week, because I know you definitely have time to do this deep thinking. It's actually something I'll be talking about in a later video, but just to kind of bring in some new ideas to see if they are helpful for your practice. Because we have 6 weeks left of this fall term, because don't we all just count the weeks based on the terms, based on semesters? Because we have 6 more weeks left of this year, what I thought I would do is that for the 6 weeks, I would talk about one chapter of one of each 6 chapters of my new book, Transforming the Canadian History Classroom, Imagining a New We. There is also a teacher's book club discussion guide available online, and so the questions that I'll be asking or the reflection prompts are ones from the discussion guide, if that is useful for you. So I thought we would just dive right on into chapter 1. And to be clear, I'm not quoting myself, I'm quoting other people that I reference in the book, just as a way to broaden that scope of who we read, what we read, and the ideas that we listen to. So one of the key things in the introduction, as it is for many books, is to set out the theoretical foundation. So like who I read, what ideas I'm influenced by. And I talk about a couple different things, but primarily I talk about critical race theory. Critical race theory is a body of theory that developed in the 1960s based on American legal theory. So it comes from a legal tradition, it comes from an American tradition, but it has been brought into Canadian context and for context outside of the law. There's a lot written on critical race theory and education. You should check it out. Critical race theory has 3 central tenets, and this, it's not like this one thing that everyone just agrees on, like feminism, for example, but if you look at the history of critical race theory, you see names like Derrick, Cheryl Harris, Kimberlé, Crenshaw, Richard Delgado, and so when you bring a lot of those ideas together, there are 3 main tenets of critical race theory. The first is that racism is endemic of society, which means it's not an individual thing, it's a systematic thing. It is built into the types of society, the type of society that we have. It is not an aberration, it is built into our society. So that's the first one. The second is the notion of liberalism and how difficult the idea of liberalism is for a world with greater racial justice. So a lot of us, I assume, that are watching this video align with more leftist ways of thinking. Liberalism is definitely a left way of thinking, and so you might question why it is a problem. Liberalism brings in ideas such as, I hear a cat, such as colorblindness, such as meritocracy, such as objectivity. These particular ideas say that equality is a process. So we're just gonna do our thing, it's just a process. It doesn't focus on equality as a product. It's not a radical visioning of the world. It is a way to be the world needs change, but when we focus on things like objective evidence and reasoning. Oh, you can see a cat right there. When you focus on us being in a colorblind society, the best person being hired, a meritocracy, these ideas don't actually progress society. They kind of keep society where they are with just small things inching ahead. I focus very much on a radical notion of history education and understanding history and the world by focusing on we need to actively work towards change, not say change will come when we're all kind of playing by the rules. The third element of the CRT, critical race theory, and one that's really central to how I understand history, is the notion of counterstory, or more broadly, the notion that story allows us to understand the world and make sense of the world. Therefore, we need things like counter stories, and this is specifically the work of Richard Delgado. We need the work of counter stories to counter these narratives, to say, no, there are other ways to live other than the ones that we kind of know. So we need to push back against what we think is normal by telling new stories, by disrupting the stories that we have with different stories. And I think of Thomas King's The Truth About Stories is that that's all we are, that we live with stories, but we also live in them, and that stories can trap us in a particular way of understanding the world. So this third tenet of critical race theory is very similar to those kind of ideas. That story, that narrative allows us to tell a different way about the world. So I focus on critical race theory as a really, really central way of understanding the past, understanding education, understanding history, understanding the ways that we need to engage in the teaching and learning of history. So critical race theory is a really important theoretical foundation for my book and for my work, if that hasn't been obvious if you've watched other videos. But I also pair that with post-structural theory and postmodern theory. And you might be like, okay, I'm done with the video now. I got what I wanted from it, because those ideas often get a really bad rap. In fact, the ideas of postmodernism and post-structuralism in history education has been called a labyrinth with no exit, destruction with no solution, like ripping out all the pages of the textbooks and just leaving you with an empty shell. Like, it has gotten a really bad rap in educational theory generally, and like history education specifically. I would like to change that. I mean, I'm not the only one. There's amazing people doing this work across like Canada and the US, other places as well, but I know more of the American scholars. And so I really invite people to kind of lean in and try to understand post-structural theory and postmodern theory a little bit more through the ways I present history in these ways. And primarily, when I pair critical race theory and the notion of liberalism being a problem, racism is endemic in North American society, and that we need to look at counter stories, post-structuralism works really well because, and I'm quoting Joan Scott from 1988, post-structuralism brings in new ways of analyzing constructions of meaning and relationships of power that may call unitary, universal categories into question and historicize concepts otherwise treated as natural or absolute. And so if you think of this idea about post-structuralism analyzing constructions of meaning, challenging what is normal, what is objective, what is natural, what is absolute, when you pair that with critical thinking, when you pair that with critical race theory and the critical thinking you want your students to do in the classroom, you can see that post-structuralism helps us deconstruct those stories that bind us to a particular version of race and possibility that really narrows what we can do in the history classroom. And so I bring in this idea of critical race theory and post-structuralism, along with things like intersectional feminist theory and critical pedagogy, to say that when we bring these ideas to our history education, we can understand the past differently in more nuanced ways, and we can understand what's possible in the history classroom in more complex, nuanced ways. And that is my goal for the book and for the work I do in history education generally. So this week, I leave you with this question from the Teacher's Book Club Guide. If you have downloaded it, the link is below. But one of the questions for this chapter is, this introduction identifies body of theory that shape how we think of history education, specifically critical race theory, intersectional feminism, critical pedagogy, and post-structuralism, just like I said. Are you familiar with these theories? In what ways are you familiar with them? How would you define them? Have you applied them to your teaching before? Do you see ways that they can be applied to your teaching in the future? So with these questions, I'm asking you to reflect on the ways that you may or may not have heard about or known about these theories, maybe in your undergrad, maybe in your B.Ed., maybe just in the world. I know critical race theory is being talked about a lot in the States right now. how do you understand them? How do you relate them to your practice? Can you relate them to your practice more? And perhaps my book can help bring out some nuances of these theories that can help you think about that for history education. So because Mondays are meaningful, I hope this little introduction to critical race theory and post-structuralism was useful and helpful for you. I would love to know how you are thinking about these ideas. Please comment below if you have encountered these ideas before and how you think they might be applied to your practice if you haven't brought them in already. And next week on Monday, I will bring in some quotes and theories that have helped me think about the second chapter of my book, which is on the current landscape of Canadian identity and curriculum. Have a great week, everyone.